Hello everyone, and welcome back to Dr. Creepy. In tonight's video, we're venturing deep into 7 disturbing true park ranger horror stories, chilling encounters from remote forests, snow-covered wilderness, and backcountry trails where the silence feels alive and the dark moves on its own. From footsteps circling fire lookouts to voices echoing under frozen lakes, to vanished hikers who somehow keep leaving fresh footprints at night. These accounts reveal what really happens in places where help might be hours away, and whatever's watching you doesn't need help at all. If you're new here, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new true horror stories. Now get comfortable and let's start. I worked as a seasonal backcountry ranger in southwestern Colorado, mostly covering remote campsites, avalanche risk zones, and wilderness permit checks. The park technically had designated camping areas, but over the years, more hikers started wandering into unmarked clearings and forgotten parts of the forest because they wanted the real wilderness experience. Usually that meant walking too far, getting dehydrated, or pitching a tent on a bear corridor. Most nights were uneventful, just long hikes, empty trails, and the occasional rustle in the trees. But the thing I'm about to tell you wasn't just another campsite check. Late September tends to bring temperature drops that hit hard after sundown. I was assigned night patrol after a couple of campers reported hearing distant voices in an area closed for the season. That wasn't uncommon. Echoes carry strangely in mountain valleys, but the odd part was the timing. After midnight, and coming from a section of wilderness technically inaccessible without climbing gear. The dispatcher asked if I minded doing a sweep, and honestly, I didn't. I liked the quiet nights more than the busy summer weekends. I headed out alone. The moon was bright enough to avoid using my headlamp most of the way. Pine silhouettes leaned over me like needles stitched into a black sky. I could hear squirrels darting through dry branches and the occasional owl, but otherwise everything felt unusually still. The air tasted metallic and sharp like early winter. The deeper I walked, the quieter it became, until even the wind stopped. I reached a narrow ridge, following a faint trail that led toward a valley the park never officially opened. No trail markers, no designated sites, nothing on public maps. Yet somehow hikers always managed to end up there. Whenever we recovered people, they always said the same thing, that they just felt like walking that direction, or heard something, or saw a clearing up ahead. I never thought much of it until that night. I smelled campfire smoke before anything else. That alone didn't scare me. Illegal fires happen all the time. But the scent wasn't the usual burnt wood smell. It was sweet, almost chemical, like someone burning damp pine mixed with something sugary. As I approached, the same metallic taste from earlier thickened in the air. I expected to see campers drinking or roasting something. Instead, I found a clearing with a large stone ring built into the dirt. Inside it, logs were burning strongly, too strongly, almost roaring like they'd been burning for hours. A set of folding camping chairs stood around the fire, positioned as if people had just gotten up mid-conversation. There were 2 coffee mugs on the ground, both steaming slightly. An open bag of trail mix lay spilled beside one of the chairs. What bothered me most, no tents, no sleeping bags, nothing that suggested someone intended to stay the night. It felt more like a meeting spot than a campsite. I radioed in, telling dispatch I found a live fire with no campers present. They asked for coordinates and confirmed no issued permits matched that region. I should have put the fire out and logged it for morning inspection, but something kept me there. That fire looked too fresh, too perfect. Not a single ember around it, no wind scattering sparks. Even the wood looked strangely intact for how intense the flames were. I nudged one of the coffee mugs with my boot. Cold, completely cold. That didn't make sense. It looked like steam, yet it wasn't warm to the touch. Then I heard footsteps, slow, pacing footsteps, something walking the edge of the clearing. I flashed my light toward the sound but saw nothing. Leaves rustled again, now on the opposite side. Every direction I turned, the footsteps shifted just beyond sight. The pacing wasn't panicked or startled. It was deliberate, like someone circling me. I stepped closer to the fire, trying to track where the sounds were coming from, when a sudden gust of cold air blasted across the clearing. The fire flared brighter, almost white, then returned to normal as if nothing happened. There shouldn't have been wind at all. The trees were motionless. I backed away, suddenly doubting what I was seeing. My radio crackled, but instead of dispatch, I heard faint voices, multiple voices, like overlapping whispers. They weren't saying words, more like murmuring in a language I couldn't identify. I lowered the volume, thinking maybe interference was bouncing off the mountains, but the whispers continued even with the volume completely off. That's when I realized the voices weren't coming from the radio. They were coming from around me. Not loud, not threatening, just constant enough that it felt like someone, or several people, were just out of sight, having a conversation and ignoring me completely. I called out, standard protocol. This is Park Services. If you're camping here, you need to show yourselves. No answer. The voices carried on, same volume, same tone. I walked around the fire ring, scanning for footprints. The ground had patches of old pine needles and early frost, perfect for catching fresh prints. But there weren't any. Not one step. Not even mine, after I circled twice. It looked like undisturbed soil. I'd been a ranger long enough to know when something felt off, and everything about that clearing felt wrong. I should have put out the fire immediately, but something in my body resisted stepping closer again, like instinct telling me to keep distance. I radioed dispatch to report unusual circumstances, and that's when the voices stopped. Perfect silence. Not quiet, silent. No insects, no wind, no trees swaying. It was the kind of silence you only hear inside caves, where sound can't find space to move. Then a crack echoed behind me, a branch snapping under weight. I spun, shining my light, nothing. Another snap, closer. My body filled with that sudden shot of adrenaline you can't control, like your nervous system grabs the steering wheel from your brain. I announced loudly that I was armed and ordered whoever was there to identify themselves. My voice sounded weak against the silence. The footsteps started again, circling the fire, slow and patient, like I was being studied. I yelled again, no response. I pushed the emergency transmit button on the radio, hoping dispatch heard me breathing because that was all I could focus on. Without warning, the fire dimmed almost instantly, like someone turned down a dial. The flames fell to glowing embers as if they'd been dying for hours. The entire clearing sank into near darkness. I didn't move. I just stood there, watching those embers pulse like a heartbeat. Then a shape moved behind the fire. I only saw it for maybe a second, a tall outline, human shape but with shoulders too narrow and head slightly too high. Not an animal, not a trick of the light, a silhouette against the dying red glow. When I shined the beam toward it, the shape vanished, not walked away, vanished. Something in me snapped. I grabbed my extinguisher and dumped it over the embers, smothering them completely. The moment the fire died, sound returned all at once. Crickets, wind, leaves. Like someone removed earplugs. I didn't sleep that night. I wrote a full incident report describing exactly what I experienced. The supervisor read it, nodded slowly, then folded the paper and said, "Don't lose sleep over it. You probably walked into an illegal camp right after they left." But that didn't explain the cold mugs, the heatless steam, the absence of footprints, or the voices. The next evening, I returned with another ranger. The fire pit looked decades old, stones covered in moss and ash mixed with dirt like no one had used it in years. We found no chairs, no mugs, no trail mix, nothing, not even char. I knew exactly where each item had been placed, and the area looked untouched. The other ranger laughed gently, saying, maybe I was tired. But when we turned to leave, I noticed something. 3 deep impressions in the dirt behind where I'd stood the previous night. Not boot prints, not animal tracks. More like 3 perfectly round holes pressed into the soil, evenly spaced, like someone had leaned forward on something tripod-like. I didn't report those. I didn't want another condescending explanation. Over the next week, campers in nearby areas mentioned strange sounds at night, someone whispering around their tents, or footsteps circling campsites that disappeared whenever they checked. We never logged it officially. Parks don't like acknowledging unexplained things. It scares visitors. My supervisor always reminded us that forests play tricks on people, that nighttime distorts perception. But on my final patrol of the season, I returned one more time, during daylight, just to see if that clearing looked the same. I walked the trail expecting to feel unsettled again, but instead, I felt strangely calm. I reached the clearing and saw the fire ring exactly the way I described it in my report. Mossy, old, abandoned. That unsettling metallic taste didn't return. No voices, no footsteps. Everything felt normal. I stood there maybe 15 minutes before turning back, but right as I reached the tree line, something caught my eyes. In the corner of the clearing, half buried in dirt and pine needles, sat a coffee mug. Same color, same camping brand stamped on the side. The metal still gleamed like new, but the inside wasn't empty. A faint, sweet-smelling liquid sat at the bottom, thick, maroon, and dried around the edges like it had once been warm. I left the mug there. I never told anyone. Months later, during winter closure, I received an email forwarded by a supervisor. 2 snowshoers claimed they saw people sitting around a fire deep in the closed area, but when they got closer, there were only empty chairs and something whispering in the trees. The message ended with a request asking whether the park was running historical reenactments. They weren't. Now, every time I hike alone, especially at dusk, I catch myself tasting that strange metallic sharpness in the air, wondering if I'll turn a corner and see a fire already burning with chairs waiting for someone to sit down. And I always wonder who or what cleans up after I leave, because every illegal campsite I've ever found has trash, footprints, wrappers, disturbed soil, some sign of human presence. But whenever I return to that clearing, everything looks untouched. And deep down, I know the campers haven't left. Whatever gathers at that old fire circle just waits until I'm gone, until nobody is watching. And I can't shake the feeling that someday, if I go there a little too late or stay a little too long, there won't be empty seats around that fire anymore. Someone or something will already be sitting in them, ready, waiting, and wondering why I came back. I served 8 years as a park ranger in the Pacific Northwest, mostly in secluded mountain zones where the trails get so quiet you sometimes forget what human voices sound like. Most nights were peaceful, distant elk, humming branches, maybe a bear curious about a trash bin. But that year was different. We were issued extra trail cameras after several hikers complained about someone watching them from behind trees. The descriptions varied, sometimes a tall man, sometimes a hunched figure, sometimes just eyes. We assumed it was paranoia brought on by isolation, until one camera came back with something we couldn't explain. It started in late May. The forest still smelled of thawed moss, fresh spruce, and wet soil. I was assigned to rotate memory cards and trail cameras and move them farther north near an old wildfire burn scar. The walkout was easy enough. Wide ridges, open air, only a few fallen trees. One particular camera sat along a narrow side trail that few visitors ever used. Old logging equipment rusted along the path, sunken tires, collapsed metal braces, and a huge tangle of rusted chain half swallowed by earth. I hated that trail, partly because it always felt colder than the rest of the forest, and partly because the tree line got too dense for comfort. You could hear things moving, but rarely see them. The camera hung roughly 10 feet up, strapped to a cedar trunk. Rangers usually mount cameras high enough to catch wildlife without being noticed by trespassers. I pulled the SD card, swapped another in, and decided to scroll through a few shots on my handheld viewer before heading back. Most images showed what you'd expect. Deer noses too close to the lens, elk at dusk, a raccoon climbing sideways, and lots of trees swaying in nighttime blur. Then the final image showed something that wasn't wildlife. A figure, human-shaped, standing behind a group of hikers. They were maybe 20 feet away, walking away from the lens, and behind them stood someone perfectly still. The person's posture looked stiff, almost artificial. The face was blurred, not motion blur, but more like the light refused to capture it. Their clothing didn't look like hiking gear either, too plain, too dark. I zoomed in. The hikers never looked back. None of them seemed aware. I saved the file to my device. Sometimes hikers mess around or stage creepy photos, so I didn't panic, but there was something about the figure that made me uneasy. I left a voicemail for the duty office explaining what I saw, then hiked out. 2 days later, dispatch told me those hikers had reported feeling watched for miles but saw no one. I forwarded the photo to them with a request for clarification. They replied saying they never saw that person, not even once. It should have ended there. Just a weird, unexplained encounter. but more pictures like that began appearing. Rangers reviewed footage weekly. Almost every card pulled from that side trail showed someone standing behind hikers, just far enough to blend into trees. Each time, the position changed slightly, sometimes just behind a stump, sometimes partially blocked by brush. But the posture looked identical in every shot. Straight back, arms held stiffly, legs slightly apart as if braced against wind that wasn't visible. We checked park logs, but found no solo hikers matching that build. We requested names of everyone registered that week. Nothing matched. A month later, staff began avoiding camera duty on that trail. Not because of the photos, but because whoever was in them started getting closer. Not to the hikers, to the cameras. The last 3 photos from one card showed trees at dusk. In the first, nothing. In the second, just darkness. In the third, a face. Not clear, not sharp, just pale skin inches from the lens, as if someone stood there without blinking until the flash triggered. We tried comparing the face to archived missing persons databases, but details were too distorted to identify anything specific, except that the eyes were open wide. Too wide. They didn't look reflective like animal eyes. They looked alert. Weeks passed with no explanation. Eventually, administration brushed it off as coincidental positioning and recommended we redirect cameras toward wildlife-heavy corridors. But protocol said we shouldn't leave a high-incident trail without coverage, so I volunteered to keep rotating cards myself. I didn't like the idea of pulling out just because something odd was happening. One evening, just before sundown, I hiked out to check the same cedar-mounted camera. The woods were quiet, windless, even birds seemed uninterested in noise. I switched out the card, took a quick look through recent images, and froze. The last set of photos showed only forest shadows, then, halfway through, the same dark figure, but much closer. One frame captured the man just turning toward the camera. The next showed him standing directly in front of the lens. The one after that was entirely black. Not darkness, black fabric covering the camera. Someone had touched it. I scanned around, heart kicking against my ribs. Every trunk looked too similar to judge distance. The forest suddenly felt crowded, not with people, but with space that someone else controlled. I radioed in, requesting that another ranger meet me halfway on return. Standard caution. Before leaving, I took a last look at the camera strap. Nothing unusual, no fingerprints, no scuff marks, but something felt different about the bark. Slightly damp, warm. Warm bark never happens in a shaded cedar grove at dusk. I turned to leave, but heard a sound behind me, quiet, deliberate, like someone brushing clothing against rough bark. I spun around. Nothing. Another sound. Closer. Not footsteps. Not animal movement. Just slow shifting, like someone leaning against a trunk and adjusting weight. I tried to convince myself it was wind, but the trees weren't moving. I stepped back toward the main trail, every muscle ready to run if necessary, when a voice echoed, soft, low, like someone speaking through cupped hands. Stay. My body froze instantly. I don't know if the word was real or imagined. It was quiet enough to be wind, but shaped enough to be speech. I scanned up and down the ravine, flashlight held ready, and forced myself to continue backing out, refusing to turn away completely until I reached the open corridor. I walked faster than usual. At the junction where the side trail split, I saw what looked like footprints in soft dirt, bare footprints. Large ones, heels sunk, toes spread, angled slightly outward. No tread patterns, no shoe outlines, just bare, human feet pressed into the soil heading deeper into trees. I followed them about 5 feet until I realized something. The prints stopped mid-step, like whoever made them suddenly lifted off the ground. I stared at the final heel mark, feeling that thick, sinking dread climb my spine. The forest felt wrong, not threatening, just wrong, like being underwater, listening through thick glass. I hurried back toward the trailhead and met another ranger halfway. When I explained what I saw, he insisted on checking the location himself, but found nothing except a slightly crooked branch lying in the dirt. No footprints, no warmth on the cedar bark, nothing. The next morning, I pulled the images from my handheld viewer to show another supervisor. Every single file showed corrupted data. Not blank, not deleted, just distorted static, like the camera recorded over itself hundreds of times. I tried multiple readers, same thing. Our IT guy blamed exposure, moisture, or electrical issues, but other cameras in the same region ran perfectly fine. Only that specific camera corrupted its files. Over the next month, hikers continued reporting eerie incidents, hearing someone walk behind them, seeing shadows along ridgelines, or feeling watched during long stretches. We checked every report, never found a single trace. One afternoon in July, a man hiking with his dog approached the ranger station looking rattled. He said his dog growled at something human-shaped standing between trees, but when he used his binoculars, no one was there. The man wouldn't continue his hike. He signed out immediately and drove off, leaving tire dust all over the gravel. 2 days later, another hiker submitted a photo from her phone. It showed her family posing near the burn scar. Behind them, almost lost in shadow, stood the same silhouette, same posture, same distance behind a group. His head seemed slightly tilted, like listening. Everyone in the picture insisted they never saw him. I began spending more time reviewing trail data, trying to see patterns. One detail stood out. The same figure always appeared about 20 feet behind the nearest person. Never 15, never 30, always the same approximate distance, and never closer than that, except when approaching the cameras. It felt intentional, like someone measuring personal space but only getting curious when the lens was alone. I started hiking with another ranger whenever possible. We both carried radios and extra emergency gear, but we still avoided that trail near dusk. Overtime requests piled up because newer rangers refused camera rotations. One early morning in mid-August, I returned to the cedar camera with a partner. Fog hung low, heavy enough to drip condensation off every leaf. The woods felt quiet but not silent, full of subtle movement like insects shifting under bark. We climbed a small incline to the cedar tree. The camera was missing, not unstrapped, gone. Strap still attached, camera ripped off. Jagged edges of plastic hung from the buckle. Something had torn it loose, not cut, not unhooked, torn. We searched the immediate area but found nothing. My partner walked circles, looking for fragments, until he suddenly stopped and pointed. 20 feet away, exactly 20 feet, lay the camera on the ground. Not broken, just placed there. He radioed for authorization to retrieve it. I scanned the tree line, feeling watched again. Every trunk looked identical, every branch angled like a silhouette leaning forward. My partner reached down to pick up the device. Before his hand touched it, he froze, staring at the dirt next to it. Bare footprints, deep enough to suggest weight, lined up side by side next to the camera. Pointing directly toward it, we backed away, documenting everything as protocol required. When administration reviewed the images on that recovered card, nearly every file showed the same distorted static except one, an image captured 5 days earlier. A night shot. The frame showed the outline of trees blurred. Nothing unusual, until I noticed faint white reflections, eyes. 2 pale eyes reflecting directly at the camera from less than a foot away. No flashlight reflection, no lens glare, just that eerie shine like something standing in total darkness staring straight into the lens. When we zoomed in, the eyes didn't look animal, they looked human. We submitted images up the chain, but responses came back predictably vague. Lighting issues, moisture distortion, lens malfunction. But no one explained the torn strap or the placement exactly 20 feet away, or the bare footprints that disappeared halfway into underbrush. Late September, during end-of-season prep, I volunteered for one final sweep before winter closure. I needed to face that trail alone. Not because I wanted answers, but because something inside me needed proof that nothing supernatural was happening. I checked every trunk, every clearing, every cedar in the area, refusing to let paranoia trick me again. Hours passed without incident. Just forest silence, branches creaking, occasional breeze. Eventually, climbing a ridge near the burn scar, I heard faint walking behind me, measured steps, deliberate pace. I spun around, nothing. I scanned trees, ready for anything, when movement flashed at the edge of my vision. Something darted behind a trunk. Not fast like a deer, not silent like a cat, something careful. Human careful. I walked slowly toward the tree, radio ready. As I approached, I realized something. The trunk seemed wrong. Not angle-wise, but width-wise. It looked too narrow to hide behind. I turned around expecting to see the shape somewhere else, but the trail stood empty. When I left that day, I turned around one last time at the trailhead. Just habit, just closure. A line of trees stood still and quiet behind me, but between 2 trunks, maybe 40 yards out, stood a silhouette. Straight posture, head tilted slightly, arms at its sides. I blinked, and the shape stepped back behind the trunk. Not disappeared, stepped back. I walked faster toward my vehicle, refusing to look back again. Winter storms eventually shut down the northern access roads. Cameras remained offline for the season. Spring or melt might have washed away any remaining tracks. But sometimes, on cold nights, I think about that figure and wonder if the cameras were never meant to record wildlife at all. Maybe something was watching us long before we tried documenting them. Something that never looks directly at hikers, never speaks, never approaches, only observes from the perfect distance. Exactly 20 feet behind, like a rule someone taught long before we arrived. I became a park ranger for reasons most people wouldn't understand. Not because I loved nature, or peace, or the idea of protecting wildlife. I took the job because forests made more sense to me than cities did. People talk too much, lie too easily, and move in unpredictable ways. Trees didn't. Animals didn't. The woods followed rules. You walk long enough out here, you start to feel like the ground itself is breathing underneath you, calm and steady. But during my third year on duty at a mountain reserve in northern Montana, I had an encounter I still can't explain, and it changed the way I look at silence. The incident happened in late October, just after a snowstorm passed through earlier than the forecast predicted. Most of the northern elevations were closed for the season, and only a handful of campsites remained open. We'd received a report from a couple of hunters claiming they saw a light under the lake, which sounded ridiculous, but they also said they heard someone screaming long after sundown. The lake they mentioned, Lake Grayson, was not officially open to the public due to unstable ground around the shoreline. Avalanche runoffs years ago created deep sediment pockets beneath the surface. The ground looked solid, but sometimes collapsed under weight like wet sand. We had to rescue 2 snowshoers the year before, who fell through a hollow section along the bank. I was assigned to investigate and put up winter closure signage. It should have been a routine task, an afternoon hike, a few printed boards, maybe remind any late-season stragglers to head out before weather worsened. I left the service station around noon, equipped with climbing picks, emergency GPS, a satellite radio, and standard cold weather kit. The sky was unnervingly clear, too blue, too calm for the season. Most wildlife kept hidden that time of year, which made the forest feel hollow, like everything that used to breathe there was gone. The trail followed a steep ridge before descending toward the lake. Branches overhead still held clumps of early snow, dripping steadily. It was quiet, except for the occasional distant cracking sound as ice shifted along high slopes. By the time I reached the lake clearing, the sun had dipped behind heavy clouds rolling in, turning the water a dull steel color. The lake surface was mostly frozen, except for a circular opening near the far side, where dark water churned gently. That alone was strange. Water shouldn't swirl like that unless something below stirred it, but I assumed natural runoff or shifting sediment caused the movement. I walked along the shoreline looking for tracks, signs of camping, anything indicating human presence. At first, nothing. Then I noticed a patch of disturbed snow leading toward the far bank, footprints half filled with frost heading straight toward the thin ice near the open water. At the end of those tracks sat something metallic, half submerged, possibly a lantern, old, rusted, thick glass casing. I scanned for signs of the hunters who reported the incident. Nothing. No gloves, no clothing, no rope, no gear. I knelt near the lantern and tapped the metal with my glove. It wasn't frozen solid, meaning someone placed it there recently, maybe within 24 hours. The glass carried a faint condensation on the inside, like it had been lit and then extinguished. I called in coordinates and condition of the object, then took a photo as required. While doing so, I heard something faint beneath the ice, soft, almost like movement. Not water shifting, but something scraping against the frozen underside. I leaned slightly toward the thin patch, trying to listen again. A voice. Faint, far beneath. I froze completely, unsure whether I imagined it or one distorted over ice. The sound came again, clearer this time, too muffled to understand, but tone unmistakable. Someone was calling out. Short bursts, like gasping between words. My first thought was someone had fallen through, but no hole appeared along that section. The ice near the opening remained intact. I stepped carefully, keeping a safe distance, peering through pale ice. Something dark moved underneath, slow, drifting, as if carried by current. Then the voice sharpened. Help. Just once. Just clear enough. My pulse hammered. I radioed emergency dispatch, reporting what I believed was a person trapped beneath ice, possibly hypothermic. I requested immediate response, thermal imaging, and medical support. Protocol said not to step onto uncertain ice, but if someone was under there, every second mattered. I crawled forward on hands and knees, distributing weight, inching toward the darker patch. The voice came again, longer now, strained, almost choking. Please. My breath fogged against my balaclava. I pressed my glove palm gently onto the ice surface and felt vibration, like something moved directly beneath me. Slow, dragging movement. I positioned my axe, ready to break through carefully, but paused just long enough to angle my headlamp. The beam illuminated something below, smeared against the underside. Pale, like skin. A hand, fingers spread wide, palm pressed upward. My stomach collapsed inside me. The hand scraped along the underside, tracking toward me, dragging slowly as if the person beneath followed the light. I slammed the emergency call button repeatedly, breath shaking uncontrollably, forcing myself to stay steady enough to chip a careful opening. The axe struck once solid, twice crack lines spread outward. Third strike, nothing broke through, only vibrations echoing down the ice. I shouted that help was coming, that I was opening a rescue path. But even as I yelled, something about it felt wrong. The hand stayed perfectly flat against the underside, drifting at impossible smoothness, like someone pushing from below without water resistance. I struck again, using controlled force, but the ice refused to shatter. It flexed but didn't crack open. Something held pressure below, resisting breakage, like water solidified beneath surface tension instead of flowing. When I struck a fifth time, something unnatural happened. The hand beneath moved downward abruptly, disappearing into darkness. Then silence, complete, not fading, not muffled sounds, just absolute absence. My radio sputtered abruptly, not static, breathing, shallow breathing, distorted through interference, like someone exhaling into the transmitter, not mine. My breathing didn't sound like that. The channel remained open, soft pauses of inhalation and exhalation. Then it spoke. Don't. The voice wasn't underwater anymore. It was in my ear, through radio frequency, tone trembled with cold, wet distortion. Don't pull me out. I scrambled backward, nearly losing balance on slick snow. The breathing continued until dispatch finally interrupted transmission, asking me to repeat. I couldn't. My throat closed tight as frost. When emergency crew arrived 40 minutes later, thermal scanners detected nothing unusual beneath ice. No heat signatures, no movement, nothing human-shaped. The lantern was collected, bagged, and sent for analysis. They assumed the hunters invented the entire story. I filed a full narrative, including auditory evidence, but administration marked it as possible audio interference caused by cold temperatures affecting radio function. The official reasoning was that shifting ice sometimes produces sounds resembling voices, and that stress could distort interpretation. But I wasn't finished with the lake. Before winter storms shut down the area, I returned once more, midday, alone. I stood exactly where the tracks had ended, near the thin ice, staring into that unnervingly smooth surface. The opening on the far side had frozen completely, leaving no sign of disturbance. But something else remained. Pressed beneath the surface, maybe a foot under crystal clear ice, lay that same lantern. Frozen solid, metal distorted, glass fractured from inside. It hadn't just sunk, it had been placed beneath the ice like something dragged it down and lodged it there. On the glass lay a dark smear that might have been sediment, except it looked thicker, darker, dried into streaks like something had grasped the lantern tight enough to leave marks. I stared at that frozen object until cold reached bone, until the silence grew unbearable. When I left, snow began falling, slow flakes drifting like ash across the lake. Halfway up the ridge, I turned back for a final look. The ice rippled gently beneath, like something moved far below. Not water, movement. And as wind picked up across the frozen surface, I heard a faint sound, almost like words, muffled inside thick cold. Not screams, not pleading, something quieter. Listening. That night, alone in my cabin, I replayed everything I heard on that lake. The voice, the breathing, that impossible hand beneath frozen water. I still hear it sometimes in deep silence, especially during winter storms when radio static turns strange. Most rangers don't believe me. They say lakes shift with temperature, that ice mimics sound patterns that resemble voices. But no shifting temperature could create a human voice saying, "Don't pull me out." Years later, the lake remains closed permanently. Official reason: unstable terrain and ice safety concerns. But unofficially, every ranger I've talked to who has worked that zone longer than a season refuses to patrol near it alone. One veteran told me something I can't forget. On his first season in the early 90s, he heard a call for help echoing under ice long after snow covered the entire surface. He said a man drowned there in the 70s, never recovered. Locals rumored the lake took more than one person, but only one name ever went missing officially. But that doesn't explain the hand I saw or why the voice didn't want rescue. Whatever waits beneath Lake Grayson isn't drowning. It wants to stay. For most of my career, I worked in Yosemite National Park, assigned to backcountry winter monitoring. My job wasn't glamorous, just long patrols, avalanche surveys, and maintaining trail closures. Most people assume rangers get to enjoy nature all day, but most nights you're wandering through woods in dead silence, wondering if anyone would find you if you didn't come back. One February evening, we received a report from a solo backpacker about nighttime shouting near an old maintenance cabin about 7 miles from base. He claimed someone was yelling for help, somewhere behind the ridge, but whenever he tried following the sound, it moved, like someone calling from behind different trees. It seemed like echo distortion, but the location bothered me. The cabin he mentioned hadn't been used in over a decade, long before my time. It sat in a rarely traveled zone because heavy snowfall made access dangerous. Normally we would have responded in daylight, but the caller was in distress. He insisted someone was hurt. So I geared up and left, snowshoes strapped tight, headlamp ready, temperature dropping fast. The sky already looked sick, low clouds like bruised metal drifting across a half moon. Most wildlife had vanished into tree hollows. My breath cut sharp through cold air. I used my pole to keep steady along steep banks coated in ice. The wind was dead silent, heavy enough to feel like it pressed against my jacket. The deeper I went, the more uneasy I felt. Not fear exactly, but something like being observed from multiple sides at once. 3 miles in, I paused because I heard it. Someone shouting. A voice, a man's calling, "Hey!" followed by what sounded like the word "stop." Faint but real. I radioed that I had audio confirmation, then continued toward the cabin clearing. The sound grew louder but never clearer, as if someone called my name from underwater. When I reached the cabin, I saw immediately something was wrong. The door hung crooked, broken near the hinges. Snow piled inside like it drifted in over several storms, but there were footprints, fresh ones, leading directly inside. I scanned the area for any sign of the backpacker, but his prints ended before the cabin entrance. Like he stopped, then turned around, but I never saw a return track. It made no sense. I stepped into the doorway. The entire place smelled like stale wood and trapped cold. Old shelves lined one wall, rusted tools abandoned decades ago. Something metallic clinked somewhere deeper inside, like something brushing against old nails. I announced myself according to protocol, flashlight cutting through still air, radio buzzing faintly. I asked if anyone was injured, if they could respond. No answer. Then I heard it again, this time behind me. Someone yelled, "Stop!" loud enough to echo off ridge wall. I spun around, expecting to see someone stumbling through snow, but the clearing stood empty. Radio call from dispatch asked for updates. I reported entering the structure, but hearing calls from outside. They advised staying in visual range of the exit. I stepped back into the clearing, shining light across snowbanks. No movement. The footprints leading to the cabin remained visible, but nothing else. Then a sudden banging echoed around the ridge, 3 knocks like impacts against something hollow. Not wood, more like metal or heavy sheet material. I turned toward the sound and saw something near the side of the cabin, a window nailed shut, covered halfway by old shutters. The banging came from inside the wall, not from the door, not from foundation, inside the actual wall. 6 sharp hits, rhythmic, like someone slamming fist against metal. I leaned my ear cautiously toward the wood siding. Beneath heavy boards, I thought I heard faint breathing. Then a voice whispered, almost right behind my ear, "Help me." I recoiled violently, slipping on packed snow. The whisper hadn't come from the wall. It came from the air itself, like someone spoke through a crack just big enough to let sound escape. I radioed emergency status escalation. Voice trembling, I explained that someone was inside the cabin wall. Logical or not, I couldn't ignore what I heard. Dispatch said another ranger was en route, but delayed by avalanche precaution gates. Estimated arrival, 35 minutes. I didn't want to wait, but protocol required additional personnel for extraction. I paced the perimeter, scanning for access points, listening for movement, when suddenly, deep beneath snow near the back of the cabin, something slammed upward from beneath the foundation, so hard the ground vibrated under my boots. I backed up fast, heart pounding. Snow trembled like something inside the earth was hitting upward, trying to break surface. I stepped away, but something, instinct maybe, made me glance toward the cabin window. For the slightest second, I thought I saw a face, a pale one, behind boarded shutters. Eyes staring, unmoving. I raised my flashlight but saw only warped wood grain. I shouted that help was coming, that someone was on the way, that they should stay calm and remain where they were. But my words felt stupid. I didn't even know if the person inside was alive. Then something behind me began crunching through snow. Slow, measured, heavy. I spun and almost dropped the flashlight. Someone stood near a pine at the forest edge, far enough to be shadowed, but close enough to see outline. A man maybe. Too tall, leaning slightly forward as if the upper spine curved down. He didn't move, didn't respond to my call. I demanded identification, ordered him to show hands. Nothing. He just stood there, silhouette half hidden behind intersecting branches like someone trying to blend into bark. I took a step forward, and he stepped backward. Exactly one pace. I asked if he needed medical help. He tilted his head slightly, like trying to hear something inside the cabin. Not looking at me, just listening past me. I advanced slowly, telling him to remain still, when suddenly he turned and moved between trees. Not walked, shifted, like he moved all at once from one dark shape to another, almost disappearing behind the trunk line. I followed his direction a short distance, scanning snow for prints. None. Absolutely none. No sign he ever stood there. I hurried back toward the cabin, feeling watched from every direction. I kept flashlight pointed outward, but couldn't shake the sensation of movement just beyond sight. I stepped toward the wall where I'd heard banging earlier. Touching the boards again, I listened. Nothing. Silent. Dead silent. Then a voice rasped. Just a strained whisper pushed through cold. "They're not dead." It came from behind me. Again. No one was there. Another slam shook the cabin interior, so loud it sent loose boards vibrating. I backed away fast, breath steaming hard, ready to retreat toward the main trail when headlights cut faint beams through trees. Another ranger on a snowmobile. Relief flooded so fast my knees nearly buckled. When he arrived, he pointed a flood lamp at the cabin. No movement, no sound, nothing beneath the snow. We searched inside for nearly an hour. No person, no hole, no interior chamber where someone could hide, no crawl space under the floor. The banging location made no structural sense. The wall held nothing but insulation and beams. But something on the inside surface of the back wall made me stop. Not scratches, indentations. Thousands of them. Tiny circular depressions, as if made by fingertips pressing repeatedly from inside. The other ranger said maybe animals clawed over years. But no animal claws leave perfectly round indent shapes like finger pads. We photographed everything, reported everything. Administration sent structural inspectors the following week. They claimed the building foundation shifted, causing settling noises mistaken for banging. But 3 nights later, the backpacker who originally reported screaming returned to the station. Pale, shaking, he asked if anyone found the woman. We asked what woman. He said someone screamed under the cabin. The night before he called, he swore he heard scratching from beneath floorboards, followed by a muffled voice repeating, "Don't leave me." He tried forcing the door open, but gave up and ran. He also said he saw someone standing in the tree line watching him the entire time, tall and still, barely moving except to lean a little closer. Months passed, snow melted, and access reopened. Eventually the cabin was quietly removed from maps and later demolished entirely. For safety. But before demolition, I walked back one last time, not for closure, just curiosity. The walls were already half dismantled, floorboards torn up, insulation exposed. Beneath one section, I saw a shallow recess, more like a crawl gap used decades ago for old wiring systems, just wide enough for someone to lie curled inside if they somehow got trapped. In that space, on the underside of a wooden beam, I found a smear, dark, dried, old enough to flake. Maybe animal blood, maybe something else. There were hair strands embedded in it, long, human-textured hair. And near that smear, fresh snow had melted into 3 distinct impressions, bare toe shapes pressed into dirt under the beam, but no prints leading to or away from that spot. To this day, I don't know if someone once died trapped under that foundation, or if something else lived beneath it. Sometimes during late winter patrols near remote cabins, I hear faint knocking echo across frozen ridges, soft at first, then steady, like someone calling from behind wood. And every time, I remember that whisper at my ear, cold enough to cut through my bones. They're not dead. I spent nearly 11 years as a park ranger in northern Wyoming, stationed mostly near the alpine research areas, where winter lasted longer than people realized and radio signals died behind every ridge. Most incidents involved inexperienced hikers pushing through snow or wildlife encounters they didn't understand. But there was one case that still keeps me awake during storms, because I still can't prove whether what I saw actually happened or if something simply wanted me to believe it did. It was late October, that fragile in-between season when the lakes thin with ice just enough to carry a layer of snow, but not enough to support weight. Most of the facilities were shut down for winter, except Upper Quarry Lookout, a small observation station built into the side of a slope about 8 miles from the service station. It had a single radio repeater tower and a solar-wired maintenance shed that kept data loggers running through snowfall. That shed required manual inspection every 2 weeks, even in winter closure. A storm had been forecasted to hit early that evening, but the supervisor insisted I check the station before wind gusts iced over solar panels. I didn't argue. Sometimes night patrols gave me more peace than daylight duties. The trail was quiet, pine silhouettes bending in deep wind. Snow drifted under moonlight like powdered glass, sometimes so thin you could see forest floor weaving below. The trail itself was steep in sections, but I'd done it enough times that my legs moved without thinking. By the time I reached the last ridge, mist began rolling through trees, thick enough that visibility dropped fast. I slowed down, scanning the ground with headlamp, making sure I didn't step onto weak snow. The world narrowed to about 10 feet of visibility, just swirling white and dark shapes beyond. The lookout emerged faintly, just a shadow of timber against fog. The metal tower beside it rising upward like frozen scaffolding. The building had one door, padlocked but easy to unlatch with ranger keys. I climbed the short step and unlocked the latch. Inside smelled like old dust and cold equipment. The solar regulator panel blinked steady green. Everything looked normal. I logged the inspection on my clipboard, sealed the door, and prepared to head back before storm winds locked me in. The wind howled suddenly from behind the tower, sharp enough to vibrate metal braces. I tightened my jacket collar and started walking, but something in the snow caught my attention. Prints, fresh ones, barefoot, human-shaped, toes distinctly pressed into soft snow, clearly visible, leading downhill into fog. My stomach sank. No one should have been out there without snowshoes or boots, especially barefoot. It was freezing. Feet would have frostbitten in minutes. Yet the prints looked recent, edges crisp, snow crystals undisturbed by wind. I radioed dispatch to report possible lost hiker activity, but static choked through the line. I tried again, nothing but muffled distortion, like someone whispering under interference. I told myself atmospheric conditions were blocking signal, not unusual in storms. I decided to follow the prints only for a short distance, just far enough to see if they led to gear or signs of struggling. The tracks headed toward a lower ridge, where fog thickened into near white. I stayed slow, scanning constantly. After 30 yards, the prints abruptly changed direction, suddenly turning uphill toward a cluster of trees I knew led nowhere safe. There was no trail that direction, only a steep ravine buried under snow. I called out, announcing that I was Park Services and that if anyone needed help, they should respond. My voice echoed strangely, not natural reverb, but fragmented, like bouncing between invisible surfaces. Then faintly, something answered. A low sound, not quite a word, somewhere inside the fog, somewhere too close. I stepped forward slowly, headlamp shifting over snow. The prints continued, but something about them changed. Before, the toes pointed forward, walking normally. Now, the toes angled downward slightly, like someone dragging their feet carefully, or walking while leaning forward at an odd angle. I scanned ahead, and something moved between trees, a slow shift of darker shape against white fog. Too tall to be wildlife, too still afterward to be wind. I stepped back, raising my voice again, insisting I was there to help. My heartbeat pounded so hard it steamed the edge of my mask. The shape didn't move. I aimed my flashlight toward it. Nothing but fog, like the shape absorbed itself into mist. The prints kept going, up toward the ravine. I couldn't follow. That terrain was deadly in storm conditions. Standard protocol meant I should return and call for search at daylight. I radioed again, finally a crackle. Dispatch answered faintly, cut by interference. I tried describing the prints, the possible sighting, the direction of travel, but something else came through the channel beneath static. Not dispatch, a voice. Low, slow, coming through radio frequency with impossible closeness. "Don't leave me." My blood went cold instantly. I tried responding, but dispatch didn't hear me. The voice came again, clearer this time. "Don't leave me." It sounded like a woman, barely audible, but unmistakably human. My training told me storms distort audio, sometimes mixing radio signals, but the voice had tone, desperation, too real for distortion. I forced myself to pull back. Nobody survives a fall into that ravine. I had to return and initiate a proper search. I moved back toward the lookout, and something followed behind me. Soft snow crunch, bare steps, slow, measured, matching my pace. I didn't turn around. I just walked steadily, pulse beating so hard I could barely think. I didn't know if someone actually followed or if snow shifting behind me mimicked steps, but every instinct screamed that stopping would be a mistake. When I reached the lookout, I risked a glance behind, nothing but fog. The hillside below looked like one continuous frozen sheet. Somewhere far beneath, a wind moaned against rock, like something calling from a hollow place. Back inside the station, radio finally cleared. Dispatch asked for status. My voice shook, trying to sound professional, reporting barefoot prints heading into avalanche territory. They told me nobody had permits in the area, no hikers logged, no reports of missing persons, but they'd send a team at sunrise. Storm winds worsened. I realized I'd never make it down before whiteout hit. The shelter wasn't meant for camping, but it was safer than trekking blind. I performed standard storm protocol, locked shutters, rationed my thermos water, and sat near the wall heater panel, listening to gale run across windows like waves moving against glass. Sometime after midnight, half asleep, I heard footsteps on the outside deck, slow, dragging, circling the lookout. Snow crushing beneath weight, pacing around the structure again and again. Not wind-rattling wood, distinct human steps pressing into snow with rhythm. I thought maybe the rescue crew somehow arrived early, but radio confirmed otherwise. Storm closed access roads. They couldn't reach me. I was alone. The steps moved to the door, pressed against it. The metal shifted like weight leaned into it. Not forcefully, more like someone resting their head or shoulder against the door. I waited, heart racing, not daring to move. The steps finally moved away. After what felt like an hour, silence returned. I must have drifted into a half-sleep because I woke suddenly to something else, soft tapping on glass. Very faint, from the outside window. Not knocking, just tapping, like a fingertip gently tapping frozen pain. I didn't look, I couldn't. For the rest of the night, I felt something near the door, just inches away, separated by wood. Not banging, not screaming, just presence. Cold, patient presence. When dawn came, I opened the door cautiously. Bare footprints circled the lookout repeatedly, dozens of them. Some fresher, cleaner, deeper into snow. A perfect ring of human prints surrounding the structure. But none started anywhere. None ended anywhere. No approach track, no departure trail. Just prints forming a circle, like someone walked around the lookout again and again through the whole night without ever arriving or leaving. That single detail has never made sense. Tracks always show origin and exit unless wind buries them. But wind hadn't buried anything. They were well-defined, exact, disturbing. Search team arrived hours later. After a full sweep, they declared no human presence, no lost person, nothing. They blamed wind distortion, imagined voices, misinterpreted animal tracks. But that day after they'd left, I noticed something while climbing down the ridge. A voice behind me on radio static, faint through weak channel. "You left me." I froze solid, turned around, nothing but endless white. Years passed. I still patrol some winters, but I refuse assignments near Upper Quarry. Not because I'm afraid of being alone, but because sometimes during storms, radio static carries something under transmission. Soft breathing behind interference, shifting through wind frequency like someone speaking from far under snow, asking again and again not to be left. Nobody ever reported a missing woman near that region. No incident record links any hiker or camper to that place, which means one of two things. Either no one died there, or someone died long before records existed, long before patrol schedules, long before lookout stations, long enough to learn how to walk circles in snow without leaving, long enough to follow voices home. Most people assume working night shifts in a national park feels peaceful. Stars overhead, wind moving slowly through pines, maybe a distant owl somewhere above the dark. But what nobody tells you is that night silence in the wilderness isn't peaceful. It's alive, like something breathing just outside the radius of your flashlight. I've worked in Rocky Mountain National Park for a little over 7 years. At first, it was breathtaking. Snow-capped ridges, untouched valleys, wildlife moving like shadows between tree lines. After a while, though, the beauty becomes background noise and all your attention goes to what you can't identify. The voices that never quite sound human, the lights that shouldn't be there, the night movement that stops when you turn around. But nothing prepared me for what happened at Timber Ridge Station. The station wasn't really a station, just a renovated fire lookout we used for weather telemetry. It sat near an old burn scar from a wildfire decades ago. Local folklore claimed a camp had burned there in the 60s, but we never found records. Old-timers whispered stories occasionally, but most dismissed them as rumors mixed with old trauma. One October, I was assigned to run periodic temperature readings during a stretch of unusually cold nights. The valley below the station dipped to sub-zero after sunset, strange for that early in the season. We suspected equipment error. My job was to verify. The first night I hiked up around dusk. Cold air bit through fleece like needles. Pine branches cracked under thin frost. The world went quiet long before midnight, like the entire forest held its breath. The station door stuck slightly from warped wood, but inside felt stable enough. The telemetry panels blinked unevenly. I calibrated temperature sensors manually, recorded elevation variants, and waited for standard readings. Midway through logging data, the station radio flickered. Static at first, then what sounded like a faint voice, too rapid to understand. The signal cut sharply, replaced by open-channel hiss like someone held down a transmitter without speaking. I tried responding, but dispatch never heard my reply. I dismissed it. Storm fronts sometimes distorted radios. When readings finished, I stepped outside to verify wind gauge rotation. When something caught my eye, down valley, maybe half a mile away, a flickering light moved between trees. Firelight, orange gold, pulsing irregularly. No camps were permitted anywhere near that valley after October. I checked permit logs, none issued. I watched the light stop, then move again, then disappear entirely. I scanned the darkness longer than necessary, waiting for it to return. Nothing. I hiked back just after midnight. Snow dust blew sideways across trail, but the hike was manageable. That night, I convinced myself the light was reflection, maybe moon off ice. Second night, I returned earlier, around 7 p.m. Same routine: calibrate, log, verify. Only this time the radio hissed continuously, no voices behind static, just hissing, low, steady, like wind passing through a narrow gap. I shut radio off, which I never do on duty, but the noise interfered with readings. Around 10 p.m. I stepped out again. The valley looked darker than usual. No moon, heavy clouds. Then I saw it again, the light. This time there were two of them, moving parallel across the far tree line, steady like lanterns carried at walking pace. Not bright enough to be headlights, too warm in color to be headlamps. I radioed again, no response. Paper logs marked no hikers, no patrol units nearby, no fire crew. The lights continued until both dipped behind ridgeline. Still no radio contact. I returned inside, watching frost creep along windows. Close to midnight, something heavy struck the roof. Not branches, not pine cones. Something solid hitting metal. Once, twice, a third time louder, like a rock thrown from above. I climbed the ladder to rooftop hatch and pushed gently upward. The roof looked empty except for frost. No sign of falling debris. I swept my flashlight across shingles and saw nothing except snow crystals catching light. Suddenly something slid across shingles behind me, fast, scraping along metal. I spun my light around, nothing. I scanned treeline below, blank darkness. I sealed the hatch and remained inside for the rest of shift. The third night, I felt sick leaving base. Not flu, unease. A pressure in my chest I couldn't explain. The trail felt eerie even before sunset. Low fog drifted along ground like something crawling uphill. When wind blew, fog folded around trunks like fabric. The station interior felt colder that night. Thermostat read below freezing, though panels showed normal operation. My breath fogged inside the room. Radio static returned, this time faint voices layered under hiss. Not words, just syllables, like someone speaking without language. Whenever I tried adjusting frequency, voices shifted pitch, not clearer, just closer to recognizable tone, like breath against microphone. I shut radio completely. Silence filled room. But then a sound came from outside, distant at first, then louder. A metallic dragging noise, long, pausing, continuing. Like something heavy scraping across metal sheets. At first I assumed wind caught loose siding, but the dragging noise circled the building. Slow, consistent. Scrape, scrape, scrape. I unlatched door and shined light across deck. Nothing. Snow unbroken. No movement near tower. I stepped onto deck, wooden planks, and listened. Silence. But when I closed the door, scraping resumed. Closer this time. Beneath floorboards, maybe. Panels flickered. A sudden temperature drop triggered alarms. The entire station seemed to exhale cold through walls. I layered gloves, checked ventilation and wiring parameters. I found nothing abnormal except interior temperature dropping nearly 10 degrees in 5 minutes. I positioned myself near heater unit. That's when I heard it. Something outside, soft, broken, like a person whispering through wind. Fire, please. My blood ran cold instantly. It sounded like someone freezing, begging. I opened door quickly, shouting out, identifying myself. Snow whipped into doorway. The cold felt wrong, too sharp, too sudden. No footprints, no lanterns, no one near clearing. But then far down valley I saw multiple small lights this time. 5 maybe. Clusters, flickering, like campfires burning low. One flared suddenly bright, then dimmed, as if someone threw something over flame. I radioed emergency channel. Dispatch came through faint, asking location. I confirmed unknown fire activity near burn scar. They said no teams were active, no campers registered, no controlled burns scheduled. They dispatched a support ranger, estimated arrival 3 hours due to icy switchbacks. While waiting, lights flickered again. 2 vanished simultaneously, then reappeared further east, as if moving together. Then I smelled something, the faintest hint of smoke drifting uphill, pine mixed with something chemical, sharp, like scorched varnish. That set me on edge. I closed shutters and stayed near radio. Around 2 a.m., radio crackled softly. A voice, small, almost childlike, whispered, "Cold." The radio wasn't on transmit. Nobody should have been speaking to me. I said, "Identify yourself," trying to keep voice steady. Silence returned, but under static, something faint lingered. Not speaking now. Breathing, slow, wet breathing against receiver. I shut off main power to radio, but breathing continued, now behind the wall panels. Not electronics. Real. Almost like someone breathing shallowly inside insulation. I backed away, heart hammering so hard I felt dizzy. Then somewhere above ceiling, something moved. Slow crawling motion across rafters. I stepped toward ladder hatch and listened. Something slid across metal roof like dragging fingertips. Just before support arrived, the scraping stopped. Ceiling stayed silent. Radio returned normal. Temperature rose slightly, as if heater suddenly started working. The arriving ranger claimed he saw no fire activity descending valley. He dismissed my report as fog reflection from distant cabins miles away on private land. But something bothered me more than lights. Before leaving, he said something casual. "Funny thing about Timber Ridge, this place burned down once, back in the 60s. Lightning strike hit a backcountry campsite. Killed everyone sleeping during a sudden wind shift." He left like it was nothing. but I hadn't told him I'd smelled burning pine or heard someone whisper, "Fire, please." Later, I found archival records. 1964, wildfire killed 6 campers overnight near that same valley. Fire spread so suddenly they never stood a chance. Reports said remains of camps were scattered, tents burned into ground. One of the victims identified only by dental records. Child, 11 years old. Every October since then, tiny brush lights reported occasionally by locals. Nothing ever verified. I requested reassignment away from Timber Ridge. Approved easily. Turnover was high for that station. But twice this year, radio transmissions on that ridge picked up something faint, always on emergency open channel. One night, a new ranger asked if I'd ever heard someone breathing on radio. Last week, during a storm, someone called into dispatch reporting lights moving through burn scar. Kids, maybe. But when confirmed units arrived, they found no one, no lights, no fires. Just temperature drop and wind. Sometimes I still patrol nearby. Sometimes I turn off my vehicle engine in total silence just to listen. And on those nights, cold, fog thick along ground, I swear I hear something burned whispering through the freezing dark, small voices drifting upward from the old wildfire scar. Fire. Please, fire. Not asking for warmth, asking for it again. Most people assume that park ranger stations are clustered together for convenience, but in reality, most of them are miles apart, especially in older national parks where infrastructure hasn't changed in decades. My assignment wasn't glamorous. A region of deep canyons and old-growth woods in Northern California, where what the public saw as scenic wilderness looked to me like miles of dark terrain waiting to swallow radio signals. I'd worked there 7 seasons before anything truly strange happened. Most emergencies involved dehydration or broken ankles. Occasionally, bears wandered through campgrounds and we had to politely escort tourists back to their cars. But 2 summers ago, something changed. Something beneath the ground. This region had a long network of abandoned service tunnels carved in the early 1930s when the park was still being mapped for future infrastructure. They were sealed in the 60s, rotting timber supports, unstable rock, unsafe for entry. Rangers were instructed never to approach them except for annual inspections. That summer, my supervisor asked me to check one particular tunnel entrance after hikers reported breathing sounds coming from inside. I assumed they meant wind through rock cracks, but protocol required investigation. The entrance sat deep in a canyon where sunlight barely reached the ground. Old rusted warning gates sealed the mouth, padlocked decades ago. I expected a quiet, forgotten structure. Instead, I heard something else before I even saw the entrance. A rhythmic thumping, slow, deep, almost like something heavy striking earth far below surface. At first, I thought hikers were messing around with rocks or stomping near the gate, but the sound didn't echo. It vibrated upward like tremors through ground. I radioed dispatch, noting tremor noises and asking if geological surveys recorded seismic activity recently. They checked, nothing significant, no local faults, no blasting near park borders. The canyon felt somehow hollow, like sound traveled differently there. Every time I listened, the deep thudding pulsed through soil, almost timed, like a slow heartbeat coming from miles underground. I approached the tunnel gate, shining flashlight through iron bars. Darkness swallowed the beam almost instantly, like the tunnel didn't lead into another space, but into nothingness. Something about that blackness made me uneasy. I couldn't see old support beams, old mining rails, nothing. Just black. Then a cold rush of air exhaled from within, so sharp it misted my breath. Tunnels shouldn't breathe cold upward air, not in summer. Ventilation doesn't work that direction. I backed up slowly, reporting abnormal temperature, air movement, and interior obstruction. Dispatch noted it and told me to mark off trail access until structural inspectors arrived. That night, wind started near the canyon, a low constant hum, like air forced through tight passageways. The hum wasn't loud, just persistent enough that it crawled under your skin if you listened too long. 2 days later, another ranger named Collins joined me for inspection follow-up. He was older, formerly in urban search and rescue, not easily rattled. We approached the gate again midday. Light should have penetrated deeper this time. Instead, the darkness looked denser than before, like something weighted just beyond reach. Collins tapped the metal gate. Immediately, the ground beneath us vibrated. one low pulse like a drumbeat in dirt. Collins stared at me, eyebrows drawn. He tapped again. Another pulse, lower, slower. He said quietly, "That's not seismic." Before either of us suggested next steps, something else happened. A faint whisper drifted out of the tunnel. Not wind, not echo. A human whisper carried on cold air. "Don't open." We both stepped back. I tried to rationalize. Could have been distant hikers, someone messing with us. But the timbre was wrong. Too close. Too deliberate. Like someone stood directly inside, right behind darkness, whispering through iron bars. Collins radioed to halt entry plans and request immediate structural closure around the site. But dispatch didn't respond immediately. Just static mixed with faint, unintelligible murmur, layered like multiple voices breathing across frequency. He shut his radio off. We both left as calmly as possible. Over the next week, rangers reported similar things near that canyon. Deep vibrations, whispers riding wind uphill, occasional sounds at night like metal striking stone far underground. Nobody saw anything, but nobody liked patrolling alone near the canyon after dusk. Eventually, structural engineers came, accompanied by seismic specialists. They took readings near entrance and inside soil around it. Something about their faces unsettled me. They didn't say fear, but discomfort, confusion. One structural engineer quietly told me their sensors detected repetitive underground concussions inconsistent with natural movement. They assumed water pressure collapsing old sections of tunnel. But something about their tone said they doubted it. 3 days after that, someone cut the gate padlock clean through. We assumed vandalism, but no footprints, no tool marks, no vehicle tracks. Gate just hung open, rusted metal swinging slightly like someone pushed it open gently. Supervisors ordered us to weld new bars across entrance and anchor support posts deep into rock. Welding required gear transport down canyon. Took entire day. Collins and I remained overnight nearby to ensure no curious explorers wandered in. We camped near ridge above tunnel mouth, only 100 yards away. Soft wind moved through black forest. Temperature dipped rapidly, not normal for altitude. My breath fogged again. Around 2 a.m. Collins woke me quietly, motioning toward the canyon. Something stood near the entrance, a figure, in near-perfect darkness. Human height, unmoving, watching the tunnel gate, then tilting its head down like listening to something underground. I unzipped sleeping bag slowly, heart pounding so loud it filled my ears. Collins whispered, "Who's down there?" His voice cracked like he already knew the answer was nobody who belonged here. Before we could move closer, the figure stepped backward and disappeared into deeper shadows like becoming part of canyon itself. No footsteps, no scrambling, just gone. We approached with hesitation. Collins swept flashlight across entrance, and instantly we heard that deep pulse again, low, shaking dirt. But it wasn't rhythmic this time. It stopped the moment light hit tunnel mouth. Then a second whisper emerged, but lower, like someone spoke through teeth. "Down here." Collins dropped his light for a moment. I grabbed his shoulder instinctively. We backed away immediately. No discussion, no bravado, just primal exit. Back at base, supervisors accused us of exaggerating. They blamed echo illusions, temperature inversion, imagination. Collins refused to go back there, and I don't blame him. Weeks passed. Then winter storms buried the canyon under snow. Access closed. In January, hiking sensors triggered near that sealed tunnel entrance. Motion detectors recorded movement at night, at hours when snow should have stopped all animals except heavy elk. But those sensors triggered exact intervals, almost timed movement. By early February, someone began reporting distant shouting beneath canyon floor, deep, muffled cries heard only during heavy wind. Visitors staying near Ridge Lodge claimed they heard people yelling underground. Some said voices repeated something like, "I'm still here." Administration dismissed claims completely. I didn't. Something inside that sealed place wanted attention. But whatever it was, human or not, had no business coming above ground. When snow thawed, I planned to request reassignment before spring inspections. Before that could happen, Collins disappeared. He left base one night during snow flurries, took snowmobile down canyon border route, and never checked in again. Search teams found his machine upright near an old storm shelter. No sign of struggle, just helmet sitting upside down in snow. His footprints led 20 yards toward canyon and stopped abruptly at ridge edge. No slide marks, no fall path, just footprints ending like he stepped into nothing. After that, I put in formal transfer papers. I didn't care if it hurt my reputation. I wanted out. My final week, alone at base after night shift, I woke to faint vibrations under floorboards. Same slow pulses I felt near tunnel. The vibration triggered ceiling dust. Something was striking dirt below building. At dawn, I checked old park archives one last time. The tunnels were originally constructed by prison labor in the 1930s. Mine shaft expansions. One section collapsed, sealing 15 workers inside. Official record says bodies were unrecovered, entrapped behind unstable structure, inaccessible for retrieval. But there was a handwritten note attached to that record, a ranger notation crossed out in red, but still visible beneath. Original note read, "We hear knocking every winter, voices sometimes, request permanent closure, request excavation to confirm, underlined, crossed out." Final typed note replaced it, structural explanation, nothing beneath, no excavation warranted. I still keep a copy of that note with me. Not because I want proof of anything paranormal, but because sometimes at night, especially during earthquakes or heavy construction outside my apartment, the walls thump softly, like something deep beneath earth knocking just hard enough to be heard, signaling upward. When that happens, I lie there completely awake, knowing I'll never go back into a national park again, wondering if those workers died completely, or if something else stayed awake under miles of rock. Nobody can convince me otherwise. Whatever is under that canyon wasn't buried. It's still knocking.